Okay, so in this video, I'd like to introduce you to interviewing. We're going to be using a phenomenological interview method developed by the researcher Claire Petitmengin. I have adapted um, her method to be easily digestible in this handout that I've made. This should look familiar to you. It's the same handout you've used earlier in the semester to interview one another in pairs as you were preparing to write your lived experience description with thematic reflection. I do think before you start interviewing a participant to please read through this entirely and to use the advice here to conduct your interviews. It will be crucially important that you get really good data. So we're collecting data through these interviews. And again, we're trying to investigate your research question. So in order to understand as best as possible um, what your experience is, what is important in that experience, you'll need to elicit very good responses from your interview participants. And that's what this handout and the example I'm going to walk you through in a second is meant to help you do. The better your interview, the better the data that your interview participants will be able to generate, which is a really good description of the experience, a really accurate, detailed description of the experience. And then the easier it will be later on to pull out themes, to analyze them, and your exploration will be more fruitful for that reason. So spending extra time getting a really good interview and extra care getting a really good interview the first time will save you time down the road. I think an interview that elicits a really good firsthand experience description will take about 45 minutes. Could be a little longer, could be a little less. But if your interview is 5 or 10 minutes long, likely you haven't elicited yet a really good description. That's my guess. I'm not saying it's impossible, but my guess is that it will take longer to go through that. So again, read through, please, this on your own carefully. And what I'd like to show you today in more detail is this sample interview. This is from a student I had in a previous semester. This is his interview with an interview participant. This is someone, a family friend that he knew, and he's interviewing them about the experience of leaving work. Now, your goal as an interviewer is to get your interview participant to relive that experience out loud. And so what you're trying to get them to do early on in the interview is to go back to a particular moment when they had that experience, not just what's that experience like in general, but ask them to go to a particular instance where they had that experience. And to begin getting them to remember things like the time of day, the time of year, what it felt like, what things looked like, and to really slow them down, what that's going to do is help put them back into that memory quicker. Okay. You might see as a person is reliving a memory that they are will start kind of looking away, looking off into the distance, or maybe closing their eyes, or maybe miming gestures that indicate that experience. Those are all signals to you that you're starting to help that interview participant to relive that experience out loud. So this is a student named Conor. He's signified as CS in the transcript here. And the interview participant is JS. So what I'd like to do is just go over the early moments of this interview so we can see how Conor helps his interview participant to get into that mode of reliving their experience. Again, the experience in question here is, what is it like to leave work? So Conor begins by saying, all right, so just really to begin, how about you describe to me the experience of leaving work and what you do? And how about we start with like when you really start to think about leaving work? So note here that he's just asking in general what it's like to leave work. Let's see what kind of response that elicits. I guess it's something that's always in the back of my mind, but it really comes up post lunch, even though it's really there as soon as I get to work. I'm thinking about like, when can I leave? Conor responds, okay, that's interesting. So why don't we just start from lunch? So you see Conor trying to get to a particular time. All right, so after lunch, I'll eat either at my desk or go with my coworkers, and I can leave kind of after my boss leaves. So I'm always on the lookout for my boss, Steve, when he is clocking out. So um, we'll check with our coworkers, we'll message each other. Has Steve left yet? Does it seem like he's wrapping up? Because if he's leaving before 5 o'clock, that means that we can get out before 5. So that's important for us. Um, Conor says, so that's interesting. You're talking about what your mentality is, but why don't we talk about what you do when you actually leave work? So Conor wasn't satisfied yet that he was getting to what his research question was really about. The interview participant's kind of talking in general terms about wanting to leave work, but he's not really talking about the experience of directly leaving work. So Conor's trying to redirect or bring the interview participant back to that central question. You may have to do this several times throughout your interview. Remember, you're trying to bring them back into remembering that particular moment of relevant to your experience. So he says, yeah, so when I leave work, it's pretty simple. I just kind of take the elevator down to the lobby of the MetLife building, and then I head for the escalator down to the Grand Central Terminal. And once I get into Grand Central, you have to take a shuttle down to Times Square. And the shuttle is usually pretty crowded. It's pretty stressful trying to make that, and the subway's no fun. There's a lot of bad smells, and once you get to Times Square, you switch trains and you get I usually take the 3 downtown, one stop to Penn Station. I mean, once you're at Penn, you've got to deal with all those crowds trying to get into the long. It goes on from there. You see that he's actually starting to get into describing places and scenes and feelings and sensations. You see there's a lot more concrete language that's starting to come up. That's another good sign that Conor's starting to elicit a good lived experience description. So Conor follows up. So what kind of people would you say you were on the train with? So again, Conor's trying to get to very specific questions about what the interview participant is seeing, what it's like to leave work, trying to get them into physical sensations. He's asking follow-up questions to get clarification on certain things. And then he redirects him again. They kind of get off track for a little while, but then he redirects him back to the train. And you see, again, we get another nice long lived experience description here. You want to, again, get to a place where you're doing less talking and the interviewee is doing more talking. So you see, when you kind of have these short back and forths, you kind of are you're not eliciting these long lived experience descriptions. You're trying to get back to where the participant's giving you long relevant narratives about the experience. So here is the first time he gives a psychological description. The interview participant gives a psychological description, and Conor follows up and wants to know more about that. He recognizes that that's an important aspect of the experience, and by following up, you see again, he gets a long lived experience description. So I hope just that brief kind of, I think it can be helpful to read through all of Conor's interview to kind of get a sense of strategies that Conor is using to direct his interview participant into eliciting or reliving the experience. And think about, as you read through this, how you can borrow strategies from Conor to use in your own interview. Getting really good at interviewing is a skill that one would develop over a lifetime, perhaps, to become a really good interviewer. Of course, that's not going to happen in a few weeks. That's not my expectation. But I do think that there are strategies we can use that will help us to get better lived experience descriptions, and that's our goal. Better is good. So that's it for now. So again, read through carefully the interview method here. Read through Conor's example, thinking about how some of the strategies he's using as an interviewer might correspond with some of the things you're reading in this. Oh, and there is one thing I wanted to point out. So it's important before you begin to bracket preconceptions. So you might have a lot of ideas already about what this experience is like. Before you conduct an interview, it would be good to write all of those down and to kind of bracket them and put them to the side. Say, I'm not going to be trying to influence my interview to go in a particular way based on these preconceptions. Instead, I'm just wanting to list them out so that I'm aware of my preconceptions, what I already think about this experience, and to put them to the side so that they aren't driving my question asking to try and manipulate, even maybe unconsciously, the interview to go in a particular way. You're not trying to get the interview participant to say anything in particular other than to report accurately on their own experience, even if that's different from what you might expect, or even from your own experience with that phenomenon, whatever it is. Okay, I think that's my last note for now on interviewing. Please, as always, come with your questions either by email or to virtual office hours. Thanks very much.